She just didn't even sort of attempt to. She just said, well, with respect, I think the better question is whether or not the Israeli people and the American people are united and strong allies. Now, that suggests to me that there is a huge amount of frustration in the Biden administration with Benjamin Netanyahu.
Well, first of all, Alistair, what exactly was Kamala Harris asked in her 60 Minutes interview about Benjamin Netanyahu specifically, and how did she respond?
Well, she gave her interview last night, and she was asked whether Benjamin Netanyahu was a good ally of the states. And rather than trying to answer that question, or even trying to avoid the question by giving an answer to a different question, she just didn't even sort of attempt to. She just said, well, with respect, I think the better question is whether or not the Israeli people and the American people are united and strong allies. Now, that suggests to me that there is a huge amount of frustration in the Biden administration with Benjamin Netanyahu, but also Kamala Harris is conscious that 4 weeks from today, she's a presidential candidate in a very tight US presidential election, and the war in the Middle East and Benjamin Netanyahu's actions and Israel's actions are playing into that quite significantly.
I mean, how unusual is it for a US presidential candidate not to feel able to unequivocally support the Israeli Prime Minister?
I think it's pretty unusual. I mean, we must be careful and say that Kamala Harris at no point suggested that there was any lack of American support for Israel. She stressed that American commitments to Israel's security is ironclad. It's a phrase that politicians from both sides of the aisle here wheel out all the time, and it's true. But I think there is a real issue with Benjamin Netanyahu in the White House. I think they feel as though they've asked for certain things as part of the war. They feel they've been ignored. I feel I think it's felt in the White House that some of Israel's actions, both in Gaza and more recently, in the last few days in Lebanon, have come despite pleas from Washington for a bit more caution.
And that in and of itself is quite a remarkable state of affairs, because a lot of people for years said, the most important, and I think it's still true, obviously, that the most important alliance that Israel has is with the United States, but that it would be the US president who would have the power to rein in Israeli policy, whether it's in Gaza or Lebanon. Are we seeing that changing now?
I don't think the US president has ever had the power to rein in an Israeli prime minister in that sense. But I certainly think that the influence over Israel that Washington wields is significant. And don't forget that when Iran attacked Israel earlier this year, America and Britain and other allies took part in Israel's defense. America still provides huge numbers of weapons to Israel for its defense and its security. It's just on certain specific things over the course of the last 12 months. The lack of progress on a deal in Gaza for a ceasefire and for the hostages to be released. The lack of care and attention here in Washington, it's seen as towards the humanitarian situation in Gaza. The idea of caution towards the situation in Lebanon. These are all things that Netanyahu has, to a greater or lesser extent, ignored. Now, there's been tension in the past between Benjamin Netanyahu and Democratic presidents. He and Barack Obama famously got on very badly. And this is a mark of Benjamin Netanyahu's longevity. When Bill Clinton was president, he and Netanyahu crossed swords on several occasions. But I think possibly because of the situation in the Middle East, we do find, I think, a new low ebb between the White House, and of course now we're talking about Kamala Harris as a presidential candidate, and the Israeli premier.
And what, if any, impact might events in the Middle East, and obviously they're flaring up again now, have on the US presidential election?
Well, I think that Kamala Harris's words are very carefully chosen. I think there is frustration, but there's also, I think, an element that she's looking at her domestic support as well. I mean, the American election, as we know, is very, very tight. The polls suggest almost a dead heat in terms of outcome. Take Michigan, for example. It's got a huge Arab American population, a huge Muslim population. it should be a Democratic banker. If the Democrats don't win Michigan, it's going to be very difficult for Kamala Harris to win the White House. A lot of voters in Michigan say that they're very upset about the war in the Middle East and that they are going to think twice at least about coming out and voting Democrat this time. So I think some of her comments are carefully chosen. In the past, she's talked about the need to press on for a two-state solution to the Arab-Israeli question. Now, of course, that's been something that people have been searching for decades without any success. But I certainly think that Kamala Harris's comments, yes, do express a general frustration, but also it's also a nod to what we're going to see happening in the States in 4 weeks' time.
Yeah, and do you think, were Harris to win, would we see any notable difference in policy towards Israel from the Biden administration?
I think we might see tougher words. I don't think that America at any point will lessen its support for Israel's security. I think that's a guarantee. I think that's underlined. I think we might see a bit more open criticism and perhaps more leaks to the press where to express the US's dissatisfaction. But no doubt, the war as it continues in the Middle East, or the wars in the Middle East as they continue, Israel will continue to have America's strong backing.
And just finally, Alistair, has the fact that Biden is standing down, has that made him a bit of a lame duck when it comes to influencing Netanyahu?
Quite possibly. Certainly Benjamin Netanyahu will be looking and strategizing, if you like, as to how to work with either Kamala Harris or with Donald Trump, again, someone he knows very well and has been close to. So, yeah, I don't think there's any great sort of love lost between Joe Biden and Benjamin Netanyahu. They've known each other for a long, long time. And I certainly think that the relationship between the two men has soured over the last 12 months or so. I think the Israelis will definitely be looking towards the next administration and to see how best they can work with either President Harris or President Trump again.